to the entertaining Talkin' Sports.
What is going on, football fans? Back at it with another New York Giants video. And in this video, I'm going to talk about a pair of coaches as the New York Giants coaching search heats up. We're going to talk about Bill Callahan. We're going to talk about Scott Linehan. Bill Callahan, there are some rumors out there that he may, in fact, be the New York Giants offensive line coach. And I think a lot of New York Giants fans would be very excited, and we're going to get into why if they were able to bring this guy on. Of course, the offensive line has been a big problem for the New York Giants in recent years. Scott Linehan will be coming in for an interview for the offensive coordinator position for the New York Giants, along with the Carolina Panthers and the Jacksonville Jaguars. Linehan has had success throughout his career as an offensive coordinator. We're going to go over that, and I'm going to go over one point in particular that I think is a strength of his that I think the New York Giants may be attracted to. Now, of course, the link there is with the guy that 2 days ago was the presumed favorite to be getting this job, obviously in a Jason Garrett. He was his offensive coordinator when Jason Garrett was the head coach. So, interesting stuff there, and Cowboys fans grew out of favor with him after 4 years, but he had a lot of success early on before Cowboys fans claimed that the offense became too predictable. But I think he's certainly an interesting name and a guy that the New York Giants should consider. And I've even seen some speculation by Giants fans, maybe it's a package deal that they bring both of these guys on in some capacity. We'll have to wait and see how it plays out, but it seems as if the New York Giants are looking at a lot of potential candidates that have experience in this division, right? Callahan, the offensive line coach that I'm about to talk about in a second, coach for both the Cowboys and the Redskins. Last year, he was the interim head coach after they fired Gruden, but is known to be one of the best offensive line coaches, if not the best, that the sport has to offer. And I'm going to go over his accomplishments as an O-line coach, and he certainly should be better than Hal Hunter. I mean, this offensive line has been incredibly underwhelming. You know, when they spent all the resources last year bringing these guys in, you bring in a Kevin Zeitler, you bring in a Mike Remmers, you hope that Hernandez gets better year one to year two. Solder, you hope improves off his great second half, and none of it happened. By many accounts, the New York Giants offensive line actually regressed from the previous season. Now, some of that could be attributed to the fact that Saquon Barkley was hurt. Some of that could be attributed to the fact that Daniel Jones was a rookie quarterback, still learning to read defenses, things like that. But regardless, that is Dave Gettleman's primary focus. He has said he wants to build in the trenches. Well, if you could go out there and get a guy that is thought to be one of the best offensive line coaches the sport has to offer, why wouldn't you be interested in Bill Callahan? And there are some rumors that are starting to surface that they might be. Let's start there. Let's start with Bill Callahan, and then we'll work our way over to that of a Scott Linehan. This is from Ralph Facciano of SNY Sports. He was quoted as saying, per Ralph Facciano of SNY, the Giants have continuously been linked with a coach who just a season ago was roaming the sidelines of their vaunted rivals, the Washington Redskins. Bill Callahan, who has served as the Skins O-line coach since 2015 and most recently as their interim head coach, is a name that is increasingly mentioned in connection with Big Blue. And now I'm going to go over his resume. This is what he did. Started as a coach assistant with Illinois from 80 to 86. Went to Northern Arizona as an O-line coach from 87 to 88. Became an offensive coordinator with Southern Illinois in 89. Became the OC for Wisconsin from 90 to 94. O-line coach in the NFL, his first job there with the Eagles for 3 years. Became the OC with the Raiders for 4 years from 98 to 2001. Then became the head coach in 2002 and 2003. Led them to a Super Bowl appearance. Now, I read some articles that said that they blamed him for losing that game. He changed the game plan like 2 days before the game, was probably nervous, being that he was going up against Gruden, who knew the entire playbook since he was the Raiders head coach the year before. And, of course, the Raiders got blew out in that Super Bowl. Then went back to college for 4 years with Nebraska as a head coach. And then became the New York Jets, offensive line coach and assistant head coach from 2008 to 2011. An offensive line that had tremendous success, and I'm going to get into some of the accomplishments there that he was widely credited with in Callahan. Then became the offensive coordinator and offensive line coach for the Cowboys for 3 years, and we'll get into the accomplishments there. Served as the O-line coach for the Redskins for 3 years before being promoted to assistant head coach and O-line coach, and then the interim head coach this year. So there's his resume, and these are some of the accomplishments. We'll start with the Jets. I know the text is small, but I'll read it to you guys. On January 18, 2008, Callahan was hired as the assistant head coach of the New York Jets. Callahan interviewed for the position of head coach of the New York Jets, but was eventually granted assistant head coach and O-line coach. In 2008, 3 of the offensive linemen, with Bill Callahan as their position coach from the Jets, were named to the Pro Bowl. Nick Mangold, Alan Faneca, and DeBrickashaw Ferguson. All 3 repeated in 2009 under Callahan's direction of the running game. The Jets broke the franchise record in 2009, gaining 2,756 yards on the ground through 16 regular season games. They led the National Football League in rushing and averaged 4.5 yards per attempt. For the 2009 season, Peter King named Callahan the assistant coach of the year. So he had huge success with that New York Jets offensive line. Of course, I remember both those guys. They were young, Mangold and Ferguson. The Jets spent early picks on them, and they had some success early on in their careers, specifically the 2 years that the Jets went to the AFC title game, and Callahan is widely credited with that. He then went to the Dallas Cowboys, and no surprise here, very similar stuff. The Dallas Cowboys hired Callahan as their offensive line coach during the 2012 offseason. On June 4, 2013, Dallas owner Jerry Jones announced that Callahan would call plays on offense during the upcoming 2013 season, allowing head coach Jason Garrett to focus on game management. After being the O-line offensive coordinator for the Cowboys during the 2013 season, he was stripped of his play calling duties. During the 2014 offseason, the Cleveland Browns and Baltimore Ravens both asked Dallas for permission to interview Callahan for their offensive coordinator positions, but Dallas declined. Dallas let Callahan's contract as offensive line expire after the 2014-15 season, allowing him to seek other opportunities. At that time, Callahan was considered among the best offensive line coaches in the NFL, and some considered him to be the leading reason behind the success of the Dallas Cowboys offensive line, which had 3 linemen, Tyron Smith, Zach Martin, and Travis Frederick, named to the 2014 All-Pro team. So there's a history here. He had phenomenal success with the Jets as the O-line coach, did the same thing with the Dallas Cowboys. Of course, the link there, both those teams spent early assets, first-round draft picks on offensive linemen, something that a lot of New York Giants fans feel the Giants have to do. But regardless, he's had great success in that position. And I think Giants fans would welcome him with open arms, being that, our offensive line coaches have not done a very good job. You look at some of the O-linemen that have been here and gone other places, they've had more success, Eric Flowers being the latest. So this is a guy that I would be completely on board with. And then the next guy I wanted to show you guys was Scott Linehan. The Giants will be interviewing him, I believe, today for the offensive coordinator position. And if he is hired, I will go more in depth into what system he does in fact run. But one thing I was impressed with him is he seems to be the type of offensive coordinator that adjusts to the talent on his roster, what type of team they are, and I will explain that in a second. First, I wanted to pull up his resume. Started as a high school offensive coordinator for two years, then went to Idaho for 2 years as the wide receivers coach, then went to Nevada for a year as a quarterbacks coach, back to Idaho as the offensive coordinator and quarterback coach for 2 years. Then he went to Washington as a wide receivers coach before becoming the offensive coordinator and wide receivers coach there for 2 years. Then became the offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach at the same university before going to Louisville. So a long history of being an offensive coordinator in college before getting his first opportunity with the Minnesota Vikings in 2002 to 2004 as the offensive coordinator and wide receivers coach. And over that time span, Dante Culpepper had some of his best statistical years. 1 year in which he threw for almost 4,400 yards, which was a ton back then. And like I said, he adjusted to the talent on his roster. That team had Randy Moss, they had Dante Culpepper, and they were much more of a throwing football team. And he had a lot, he was credited a lot with the success there of a Culpepper. He then went to the Dolphins for 1 year as an offensive coordinator, I believe, under Nick Saban, before getting promoted to a head coach with the St. Louis Rams for 3 years. He struggled mightily due to some factors he couldn't control. I think they were 8-8 their first year, and then he completely fell off the map. He was replaced in, I think, mid-2008 as the head coach before getting the offensive coordinator with the Detroit Lions for 4 years. And much like his job there with the Minnesota Vikings, it was very similar with the Detroit Lions. They didn't have a running game. They didn't have running backs, so they had to throw the football a ton. And that's exactly what he did. Matt Stafford 1 year threw for over 5,000 yards. He had Calvin Johnson. He had Matt Stafford. And that was his philosophy. He built the team around his team's strengths. In his last year, or second to last year, I forgot what I read, Reggie Bush did come on the roster and he started to even out the play calling a little bit more, but they never ran the football that much because of the lack of talent at that position. He then went to the Dallas Cowboys, became the passing game coordinator in 2014 before taking over the offensive coordinator job there for 4 years. Like I said, at the end, like any job where you get replaced, he fell out of favor. But in the beginning, he had a lot of success. And unlike his 2 previous locations, his offensive philosophy with the Cowboys, based off of their strengths, was completely different. And I think that is something very important in a coach, whether it be a head coach, offense coordinator, whatever it may be, recognizing the strengths of your roster and building your offense or defense around that. And that's exactly what he did. He did the complete opposite of what he did with the Detroit Lions and with the Minnesota Vikings. He built the team around the run, and here's some evidence of that. He gave DeMarco Murray a franchise record 392 carries, leading to a franchise record 1,845 yards in 2014, while Romo had 34 touchdown passes and 9 interceptions. Of course, we know over the coming years, he did the same thing with Ezekiel Elliott, as they were a run-first team. This year, they did not have Linehan as the OC, and the Cowboys regressed because they got away from that. They tried to become more of a pass-happy team, and that they kind of struggled. So the one thing I will say that I like about Scott Linehan is just that. He builds his team around the strengths of his roster, or at least it seems that way, over his tenure as an offensive coordinator with those 3 locations: the Vikings, the Cowboys, and the Lions. So with the Cowboys, he was much more of a run-first coordinator, because he had Dak Prescott, because he had that offensive line, and because they invested a lot in a first-round running back. So I would expect he would do the same thing with Saquon Barkley if given the job, something a lot of Giants fans have been calling for, but he's certainly not scared to air it out as well. But an interesting name for sure. I would be really excited if we could bring on a Bill Callahan, but we're just going to have to wait and see. And as always, guys, if you liked what you watched, please subscribe, drop a comment, maybe give me a little thumbs up. Cheers.